So this morning we're going to be exploring some new exciting research about the differences in communication that we can bring to bear when we're talking to men and to women. And on the subject of gender, I'd also like to mention someone who you can come and meet on the State Street stand today. She has millions of admirers around the world, has had 4 billion hits on Twitter, and has inspired people across the globe. She's small in stature, but she's made a huge impact. She stands for something that's much bigger than our company's push for gender diversity on boards. In fact, in a way, she works for all of us. She stands for diversity, she stands for equality, she stands for progress, and she stands for us all. When she joined us earlier this year on International Women's Day, it was not to exemplify State Street's accomplishments on gender diversity, but rather to inspire us all and other companies to do better. I want to say today that at State Street we unequivocally support equal pay for equal work. And we're doing all we can to promote greater inclusion and gender diversity. She holds us all to account. She holds us all to a higher standard, and she's a constant reminder that we can all do better. I'd like to introduce you to Fearless Girl.
Plenty so far at this conference about how as a nation we're undersaving for retirement. The new state pension and automatic enrolment have started a good foundation for that, but we've also heard lots of people say at the conference that it's not enough. And women historically undersave far more than men. Perhaps that's why we find it so difficult to achieve gender diversity in our trustee boards and, in fact, across management of the pensions industry. And that's one of the reasons that the PLSA launched its Breaking the Mirror Image campaign earlier this year in order to encourage more diversity. Communications is a key part of the way that we help people to save in pensions. And the People's Pension, the Pensions Advisory Service and State Street got together to commission some research into the way that men and women talk about their pension savings. And I am joined by Darren Philp from the People's Pension, Lauren Potts from TPAS, and Nigel Aston from State Street to talk about that research. I'm going to kick off with a question to Darren, actually. Why is the research so important?
Before I get on to that, Lesley, I just noticed that there's a new sort of prop on the stage, some Strepsils mints. So I don't know if the convention centre is actually sort of learning the lessons from a previous conference that happened here a few weeks ago. But anyway, so you mentioned, Lesley, that as a nation we're undersaving for retirement. I think recent PLSA research recognises that almost 14 million people are at risk of undersaving, and this is happening at a time when more people are spending more time in retirement. Now, I'm going to put my cards on the table. I'm a big believer in nudges and defaults. You know, we've tried incentives, we've tried encouraging people into pension saving. It's an approach that just did not work, and it did not work for the mass market. And that's why we've got auto-enrolment after all. And people talk about auto-enrolment as a nudge. And for me, it's not a nudge, it's a whacking great big shove. You know, you're in a pension unless you're not in a pension. And for me, I was at the sort of first session this morning, and I think the guy from Australia, one of the supers there, was talking about the difference in outcomes for people between where people defaulted and when they tried to do it themselves. And we just can't ignore issues like that in terms of providing good outcomes for people. We also know that our current pension system and our current labour market system leads to inequalities, especially for women. So, you know, how do we get more people saving more, and how do we ensure that the communications that we provide, the products we provide, the processes that we put people through are fit for everyone? So defaults are really, really important, and for me they're the main part of the story, but they're only part of the story. And what we wanted to do was to sort of understand the role of communications and engagement in terms of the language we use. We're obviously working with a really disengaged audience, but we wanted to sort of really work out the impact of pension communications and whether how we were communicating with people, the words we were actually using, whether that was introducing biases or leading people into suboptimal outcomes. And you don't need me to tell you that this is an industry that far too long has communicated in, you know, in phrases and words that, you know, even professionals struggle to understand. So why did we do this research? Because it matters. You know, there's been lots of good work done in terms of jargon busting and clearer communications. I think more work needs to be done on the behavioural impact of how we actually communicate. And we wanted to sort of partner with this on this research with both State Street and TPAS because, you know, we will use the outcomes of this research and in terms of developing our communications approach and really making sure that we're understanding the behavioural impact when it comes to the effect of our communications.
Okay, thank you. Nigel, can you tell us a little bit more about the background to the research? I think probably the audience would like to hear.
Sure.
That.
So we know there's a gender savings gap. We wanted to see if by communicating differently to men, to women, to both, we could make a difference in sort of ownership, engagement and action. So here's the science. So humans have two basic instincts, if you will, that they're born with. And the first, under this behavioural finance belief system that is called promotion-focused, that's about being nurtured and when others give you things like, you know, food, water, and so on. The other basic instinct is to be protected, and this is called prevention-focused. And this is about, you know, keeping your kids away from sharp corners and dangerous animals and poisons and so on. And this is all sort of inbuilt. You know, this is instinctive for us. And this regulatory focus idea states that we're kind of motivated in one of these two distinct ways. Either by wanting to achieve a gain, promotion-focused, and in our world, a financial gain, or by trying to avoid loss. That's the simple. It's much more complicated, and read the report, but that's the basic principle. And to take our gardening analogy to the next stage, it's a very different form of pleasure when your neighbour leans over your fence and says, wow, your garden's looking really, really good, to the pleasure you feel when you avoid stepping on the brake and it hitting you in the face. So one of them is, wow, that's brilliant, and the other is, whew, that could be nasty. And this is what we were applying to the communication that we did. So what we were trying to do is find out if men and women had a different bias and then reflect those biases back to them in the language we were using in communication to see if we could increase engagement in that way. And the research had two phases. The first phase was looking at TPAS research and interactions, and Lauren will tell you about that in a second. And then the second was an online survey of about 1,200 people.
Okay, so Lauren, tell us about your experience at TPAS and an insight you have on the words and the language that people have been using.
Sure. So as an organisation, we collect a lot of customer information because we think it's really rich and insightful, and it's brilliant to look at and it's brilliant to analyse. So we were really delighted when State Street and the People's Pension asked us to take part with them. I'm told that the research looked at over 1.5 million words, which is roughly 8 Oxford English dictionaries, which is a lot of words. And it was 2 years worth of our customer records. So it was from the 1st of April 2015 to the 31st of March 2017. And it represented just under 40,000 customer records. And they were from our web form, written inquiries, letters, and things like that, not from our telephone. So we wanted to remove the any kind of bias from our guiders translating or transcribing, of course. We didn't want that in there. As an organisation, we think it's really important to know how people ask questions and what they ask, but more importantly, what is driving them to come to us and ask us questions about their pension. So we thought this would be really great to look at. The research itself supports the idea across the industry that women are more negative about their pensions, but I understand that it wasn't as much as men. Men's not too far away. And from our data, we have a lot more men that contact us, but that's not surprising given the nature of the pension world over the last 60 years. But from the research, it's clear that the tide is turning. So young women under the age of 30 are out, basically their male counterparts, they're more engaged in that cohort than their male counterparts. And which is really great. It's great to see that they're more engaged, they're more empowered, and they're taking more financial responsibility for themselves during this, this new changes into pensions world. We think there's also a shift in, again, back to people taking more responsibility for their personal finances. So previously, we've seen generations where their parents or their grandparents have, it used to be the man's job. My father did this. Personally speaking, my father did all of our finances, and now things have changed, and it's great to see that young women are, taking that role in doing it in that way. My chief executive, Michelle Cracknell, actually has provided a really good example for me to share with you, which is actually about scams, and it's about a young lady that contacted us, and it is on the telephone, about her boyfriend. And she says, my boyfriend has agreed for this company to come and take over his frozen workplace pension. I think this is a scam. However, he has allowed a man from his company to come into our house, photocopy our mortgage documents and our bank statements as proof of ID. I am so worried that he will lose all of his pension. Please can you tell me if they are a legitimate company and what we need to do to stop this? So I think it's a really good example to show that younger women are a little bit more engaged in this, and how her boyfriend wasn't as worried as he probably should have been.
Okay. Okay, so Nigel, what were the results of the survey?
Right, so we took the data from all these different words and turned that into a survey. And in the survey, we were asking just over 1,200 people online things about their financial literacy, things about are they savings-oriented or spending-oriented, age, gender, the whole gamut. We were also asking them a typical sort of risk assessment questions, everyday risk, to try and determine where they sat on the spectrum we were talking about before. And if you want to try any of these tests, please come to our stand, because you can sort of interact with it and try it then. And surely enough, as you might have expected, women perceive themselves as being more risk-averse. They perceive themselves as being less confident, generally. So we then took that and we devised a number of different pension messages to try and prompt action. Some of them were prevention focused, some of them were promotion focused, and we judged, like men and women, which ones they responded better to, expecting that because the first part of the survey said that women were more prevention focused, then they would respond better to those sorts of messages. So, for example, one of the messages on the promotion focus might have been, save for your retirement, improve your chances later in life. And on the other side, it might have been, have you been ignoring your pension? Prevent disaster by saving more today, expecting the results we just talked about. But we didn't get that at all. We were quite surprised by the results, because almost unanimously, guess which messages worked better? The positive ones. especially for people who had never saved any money, and for men equally as women. So, you know, if there's one thing, and we'll talk about it more, that I'd tell you to sort of go away with in a practical sense, is that if you can't segment, and segmenting is good in terms of communication, always be positive. It works a lot better for everybody.
Darren, is there anything else that you think we can learn from the research?
Yeah, so that's, I think it's fair to say that finding surprised us.
Yeah.
So we did set out to tell a gender story, but the one we got wasn't the one we expected. But I think that's powerful and that's good in itself. And the promotion focus of the messaging was, it came through loud and clear. So to my mind, the way I think about this is like Project Fear didn't work with Brexit, and Project Fear can't work with pensions. And I think we should always sort of think about that and have that within our minds when it comes to how we communicate. So while both sexes or both genders relentlessly responded better to promotion-focused messaging, we did start seeing a slight difference by age, which you can see on the slide now. And what we found is that as people got older, and there was a sort of a real tipping point around age 75, that people started responding much, or at least equivalent, to prevention-focused messaging, which was quite interesting. And it might be because people sort of were thinking about, okay, I've only got so much money to last for the rest of my retirement. I need to manage that money. I can't run out of money. I need a bit more certainty. So I think that one of the other really key conclusions as well for me was that for people who aren't saving, if you use prevention-focused messaging with them, that totally turns them off. That will lead them to totally doing the wrong thing. And if you just tell people that they should be saving to a pension, and these are all the bad things that will happen to you if you don't, then actually you're not going to get them. So I think from a communications perspective, it's really important to focus on the positivity and the promotion side of things. But what we also need to remember is, what do people hear about pensions almost on a weekly basis? People losing their pensions, rip-off charges, personal pensions mis-selling. These are the anchors that people have got in their minds when it comes to pensions. And we're not going to even sort of start getting the engagement challenge cracked, and I don't think we ever will, but we've got to give it a go, until we actually reset how people view pensions. And that is about how we communicate as an industry, but it's about how we communicate with the media as well, and making sure that the good, positive messages that are out there actually sort of get some traction and get some resonation.
Okay. I am going to ask whether the audience has any questions in a minute, but just before I do, that's to warn you, just before I do, I'm quite interested in words, as some of my friends will know. So what were the most common words used, Lauren?
So it depends on age. So the older kind of group of people were more worried, they were concerned. We saw words such as risk and loss, which is to be expected given that as you get older you get a bit more concerned about what's going to happen to your pension. The younger group, so I think 18 to 30, they were more about, it's clear, I want gains. And just speaking anecdotally about our service anyway, I've looked at some of the younger groups and what they come and ask questions about as well. And it's more, what does this mean? And positive, it's more positive wording and more about what they can do to improve their situation, which is great, which is really good engagement.
Okay, and that's kind of echoes some of the stuff we heard from the conference challenge people yesterday, for those of you that were here for that. Are there any questions from the audience? There's a gentleman over here, I think. There's a mic coming, if you can just wait for the mic. And if you're happy to, let us know who you are and where you're from.
Hi, it's Steve Rumbles from T. Rowe Price. I just wanted, you Darren, pulled the message out about prevention and promotion closing in on each other at age. I guess I'm also interested in what looks like a slight blip where they get very close. What age is that, where prevention... What age is that, and any thoughts on why that happened?
I think it's around 25 to 30 in terms of the age there. Why did it happen? I don't think the research really sort of gives us much insight into that in particular. Yeah. Although, I get the sense that people are sort of starting their savings journey. It's a long way off. And I think a lot of the messaging that does come out is like, you need to save through your retirement. It's important that you save for the long term. And I think that because younger people in particular, if you ask them about the future of pensions, it's like, I'm going to have to work until I drop. Yeah? And there's going to be no state pension when I come to retire. So I think, with the anchoring for people when in that sort of 20 to 30 age bracket is almost like, no one's going to do this for me, I'm going to have to do it for myself. So I think that's why some of the prevention stuff sort of resonates slightly more at that point there when people are actually joining the workforce.
Nigel,
there's going to be a phase 2 to some of this, and part of it is, for example, to look at a slide. I'm struggling to find this one. So some of these things I think are age-based, and some of these things might be cohort-based. So what do I mean by this? This is a chart that says, what are people's perceived attitude to risk for different ages, men versus women. And you can see for younger ages, they're really similar. But then for some reason, for people in their 50s going into their 60s, women are far more risk averse, at least their perception of their own risk aversion is considerably different to men. Now, I don't know if that's because these people, as they come through the system, will also display that same difference, or is it something about baby boomers and the differences between men and women going back a couple of generations? And that's the first part of sort of phase 2 that we'd like to look at. The other thing just to mention on phase 2 is we want to put some of the messages that we've crafted into practical use, and we're very much looking for any schemes who want to work with us on this and are willing to segment their audiences, try different messages, and then find the best one and obviously use that across the whole population. Anyone who wants to work with us on that, we'd be really keen to talk to you.
And just to build on that, if I may, this was very much about the words. Yeah, this wasn't about the delivery method or the channel of the communication. And one of the things I would like to explore a bit more is how does that channel actually make a difference in terms of having that conversation with people.
And I think to Darren's earlier point, what we're not trying to do is find a sort of magic bullet which will enable us to go in and get people to make investment decisions. As we said earlier, I think that's a lost cause. But there's this whole issue about ownership, and in previous research that we've done, big choices, new choices, big decisions, then it was really clear that as people come to make retirement decisions, they do not see this money as their own unless they get it out of the financial institutions that some of us work for and put it into their building society or bank account. And if nothing else, if this can help us instill that sense of ownership and responsibility in people, I think that would be really helpful, because I think we'll get some better results as a result of that.
Can I just put an optimistic spin on the words lost cause, because
good luck.
well, no, because actually if we believe that people won't make investment decisions for themselves in the world of DB, I think that's actually a call to action for all of us in this room. So we need to help them and do some of that for them, and that's something I've been saying for many years in my time at Policy Council, and I know Darren agrees with me on this, that it's a call to action for us as an industry. We can do things to help people and help them do what we know is right for them. So it's not a negative, it's a good thing as long as we know what we're doing with it.
Completely. So we have 99.6% of people in the People's Pension in the default fund, and that to me is a sign of success.
And at State Street we're not quite as high, but we're probably into the 80s, and I also see it as a sign of
At Whitbread we have 100% of people in the default fund, but that's because I don't offer any other options. But I don't have any complaints about that either. And when I took away all my investment options at Whitbread, the number of people electing to increase their contributions or join a higher DC section more than doubled, because they weren't frightened by having to make an investment decision as they went through their joining journey. So. Any other questions from the audience? Gentleman right at the back there.
Hi, Richard Upson here. We've also been playing with some of this data, and it's quite easy to label at a very high level. What further diversification have you looked down in terms of culture, parenthood, disabilities or anything like that? Have you actually started to drill down in that data, and what have you found?
We haven't. We'd very much like to do that. We're starting to do some of that work in the US, where it's easier to look at other issues of diversity other than just gender. That's quite hard in the UK because of how data is recorded. But yes, I mean, there's a whole number of different factors that impact how people make decisions. And yes, we want to know more about that as well. So it's a fair challenge.
Okay. There's another question down here.
Julian Cripps at Railpen. An observation from the conference, and then I'm really asking for a comment, is the observation is that the young generally aren't saving enough for their pensions. They need to do a lot more. But when I look at that in the context of young people and what are they saving for, their pension or buying a house, do we ever look at the combination of those two? Because essentially I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not going to invest for a pension because I'm going to save up and buy a house. And actually houses are great investments. They're very tax efficient, and actually they understand that, you know, house prices are going to go up, have historically gone up. It's not the problem of choice, and they actually get some benefit from owning something that they get some value from, rather than a statement that they don't really understand. So I guess my comment here, or asking for a comment, is the picture as bleak as we paint it if we put it in the context of how much money are young people investing in property and the capital appreciation that that could create, that then when they retire, they have a meaningful asset with a lifetime mortgage or something, could become the equivalent of actually quite a substantial pension?
Just before I ask the panel to comment on that, and Darren may pick this up, you need to read the Hitting the Target report that the PLSA issued last week, because we definitely talk about that and tackle that property pension. And
So you're going to put this one on me now, aren't
Yeah.
you? So just a couple of sort of observations. I don't think housing is the answer in terms of putting all your eggs in the housing basket. You know, the prices can do that. You know, there could be a bubble in the housing market. Right? If that bubble pops, then that could be quite catastrophic for people. You know, so I think...
But do people really have the choice between doing both or doing one or other?
I can't come on to that.
And we all know, don't we, the challenge for the young people is just kind of frightening, isn't it, what they're faced with in terms of getting on the property ladder?
No, exactly, yes. So that's my second point, that actually it's really difficult for people to get onto the property ladder now. You know, people are leaving university. If they go to university with debt, it's more difficult to get a job because the economic situation, or even though employment is quite high. You know, getting that first step into life, or into adult life, is becoming increasingly difficult. Well, a more general point, though, is that it's not just about pensions, so you're totally right. And the thing that frustrates me about pensions is that we think they're special, yeah, and there's this sort of box thing over here, which is pensions, and it's all about pensions, but it's not for people. You know, so it's about your housing, it's your savings, it's all the forms of assets that you actually have. And I think, you know, over time, and we might have this debate as part of the Hitting the Target at work, that actually pensions is going to have to be a much more flexible product for people. You know, it's a product that you know, serves people's needs of the past. It doesn't necessarily serve people's needs of the future. So I don't know if you heard the 100-year life session yesterday. But actually, people's financial needs over their life course are going to be very, very different going forward. And I think the pensions industry will do well if we can adjust the products and the offerings that we actually have to support people throughout their life, not just focusing on providing an income in retirement.
I'm sure Lauren sees this at TPAS as well. It's not like the old days where most of your retirement income would come from a DB plan and maybe state pension. You know, and again, research we've done last year, you know, people are going to rely on 10 to 11 different sources of income in retirement, and DC will only be, you know, one relatively small part of that. So we do need to look at the whole picture.
And just to add as well, obviously automatic enrolment, has been really, really helpful to get people to start saving into a pension. A lot of people, the queries that we've had are, I've been auto-enrolled, what does it mean? Should I be auto-enrolled? Should I not be? Part of our job is to explain to them the benefits, the pros and cons, and what that means for them. And we do have people that come to us and say, I can't afford to be in my pension because I want to buy a house. And our technical specialists take the time to explain to them that completely understand. I've been there myself, having to, weighing that up. But they have to explain to them that, you've got to think more long term, and it's quite difficult for younger people to do that. But in terms of priorities, it's okay to prioritise a house, but you've got to think about what happens when you hit 25, when you hit 30. And for us, it's about seeking guidance at those points, and you should continue to do that throughout, to talk about your pension and to think about, what that means to you. Have your circumstances changed? And there isn't an answer for it, but there are places that people can get help for it, though.
I think, interestingly, the conference challenge that we did last year, many of the young people on that said to us, well, I don't think I'm going to be buying a house anyway, and maybe a pension's more affordable.
Yeah.
Any more questions? One more question. Time for one more, I think.
Hi, Michael Watkins from Smart Pension. Do you think that the word pension is dated, and perhaps that's the reason why nobody's engaging with pensions, because it turns people off? So maybe lifetime savings is a more realistic product.
So my tongue-in-cheek comment is, I hope not, given that we're called the People's Pension.
We're called Smart Pension, so
I think a lot has been made of the sort of the tarnished brand of pensions, and it goes back to some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. People resonate. Bad things happen around pensions, scandals, and all this type of stuff. But fundamentally, people probably get what a pension is, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. People, they might not know the technicalities or the intricacies or anything like that, but they know that pension is about something in later life that will help them live. Yeah? And actually, we need to use that as an anchor and as a framing. And yes, we can talk about lifetime savings, and I think we need products that are more holistic and join it up a bit better and all this type of stuff. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. And let's sort of really think about how we can revitalise the brand. And that it's not just about name changing, but it's about developing that positivity around pensions.
I was going to ask if Lauren had any final comments about that, because she's at the coalface.
If we had £1 for every time we're asked that, we'd be very rich. Pension, it does have a negative connotation. You think of pension, you think of getting older. People don't want to think about getting older. I certainly don't. I'm going to be 25 forever. But, and it's it's a difficult one. But, Darren's absolutely right. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. You've got to think about it more. I think what's more important is that people, they know what a pension is, and then they know that they need one. But it's just about how to get them to have it, and that's the more important part, I think.
I think understanding and engagement are very much different things, because you understand what gravity is, but it doesn't mean that you can explain or quantify in a sensible term what it does and how it works. So understanding what it is and what it's supposed to do is great. But you need to have a truer engagement in what you're doing with it. So that's my...
Okay, we're not going to open the discussion up to the word engagement, because there are lots of strong feelings on this stage about that. But thank you very much. I'm going to call the session to a close now. Can I remind you that the conference, you can give feedback on the session on your conference app. And thank you very much for your participation. And thank you very much to the speakers.